colleagues. I rise on behalf of SCR 95 that also recognizes January 15th as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day to commemorate a brave visionary whose revolutionary civil rights movement made it possible for all people in this country to have equal rights. And yesterday we celebrated with a wonderful breakfast, so happy that many of our colleagues supported the Black Caucus at the breakfast. I had the honor of representing our caucus over with the Women's Caucus as we went to Chowchilla Prison. And I think it was really about the actions of Dr. King that were on my heart as we stepped into that prison. And as my good colleague talked about Dr. King's perspective on our justice system, I want you to know yesterday we learned our work is still alive, well, and needed as we heard about the continued sexual assault of women who are in our care and the lack of rehabilitative services that they are receiving. And so in this moment, I want to just reflect on that lived experience yesterday and how moving it was and how Dr. King was in the room with us. As one of the residents there said, the spirit of change is with us today. In this moment, we still live in a world that is marred by racism, hatred, and military violence. And I love the Dr. King of 1968. He is my favorite. We were talking about how his image and his words have been co-opted by far too many, but it was that end of life where he was able to reflect and sum up all of the movements, where he turned into the most radical, most defiant, and as J. Edgar Hoover called the most dangerous man in America, when he stood up for not just the end of racism, but the end of economic insecurity and the end of the military-industrial complex. I think we see today as there is war in the Ukraine, we see the war that is happening in Gaza, we have to reflect on Dr. King's approach to nonviolence against fierce hatred and decades of injustice. Dr. King's civil rights movement defended the rights of Black Americans, but really all human beings in this country. And it would not have succeeded if not all races, all religions stood up with that movement to ensure that justice would prevail in this democracy. In fact, the Black-Jewish Alliance, there was some research that showed that 90% of the attorneys who defended and protected the civil rights movement and those in it were Jewish. And many Jewish leaders marched alongside of Dr. King. And as you know, my district is where Dr. King came to do all of his fundraising. It was in many of our districts that house parties were held to support the movement by leaders like women in my district. God rest her soul, Gwen Green, who was then the secretary of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Los Angeles. We, as a people, as a community, cross sectors came together in winning and standing with Dr. King for justice in our voter registration drives, in our fight against segregation and sit-in counters. We were fighting for real policies, real enforcement to protect our terrorized communities. And when we say real enforcement, meaning that we could call on the government to stand with and protect our communities against hate and discrimination in an active and proactive way. We can learn from this alliance, we can learn from the goals of that movement, and we can continue in our state and in this chamber to unite our communities together to work for justice. As we learn from Dr. King's nonviolent resistance, we will seek peaceful solutions for our world today. We will check and watch the pouring in of billions of dollars to continue war and human suffering as we are seeing growing and developing around us with all sorts of negative forces aligning for injustice. And we have to make sure that in our state that we challenge any effort to invest more in war and armament as we are fighting to balance our budget to ensure that folks in this state and in this country are able to just meet their basic needs. and to make sure that we continue to build the real ladder to opportunity for all. Dr. King was vehemently against the ravages of the Vietnam War, reinforcing connections between war abroad and the injustices at home. He argued that America should refocus its priorities away from Vietnam and toward greater support for anti-poverty programs and diplomacy that unites the world in peace and nonviolence. And as we seek solutions to critical issues here in California, where we're facing poverty, where we are facing a crisis of housing individuals, where we are facing a crisis of defining what is rehabilitation in the face of crime that helps our communities build stronger skills and able to rejoin and become good neighbors to our communities. We have to look to Dr. King and his Poor People's Campaign and recognize that as we are the state with the most billionaires in the country, we should and can create an environment where we are able to ensure that there are basic opportunities for every Californian here to live with dignity, to live with peace, and to be able to have a brighter future for the children than we have today. Dr. King understood that racial injustice is inseparable from economic injustice. He knew that this nation could not truly move forward if it ignored the needs of the poor, saying whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Each one of us right here in this room can honor Dr. King's legacy by turning those dreams into actions, and I know we do it every day. And I think the state and our constituents are calling on us to do it now more than ever as we stand at a crossroads for our nation in terms of who we are going to be. Are we going to go back to the days that Dr. King helped to bring us out of? Or are we going to move forward into a climate resilient, brighter future that brings all Californians along to opportunity and growing our economies together? I thank you for the time today. Echo the birthday wishes to my good colleague from Gardena. And with that, I respectfully ask for your support of this resolution.
I rise today to offer my support for the resolution honoring the late civil rights pioneer, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. My tribute is not just to the legacy, but to the present-day impact of Dr. King. Dr. King is not only America's most mourned martyr, but he is our only modern-day founding father. His moving memorial in Washington, D.C., which is inside of the Lincoln and Jefferson Memorial, is the only national monument in Washington dedicated to a person of color. We admire our American founding fathers for their vision, for their courage, their intellect, their leadership, and most importantly, for their dedication to the principles of justice, liberty, democracy, and equality. As I am reading this book about Dr. King, which is the first major biography in the last 35 years, and includes a lot of interesting new material, which I will not quote from today, I am continually struck by the commitment of this leader, preacher, and orator to those bedrock principles of integration, of nonviolence, and of love of your fellow human. He asked his supporters to love the enforcers of white supremacy, even when it was a fight to the death. All of us in this chamber work to right injustices. It's the deepest calling of public service. The fact that King and millions of ordinary protesters could build a revolution 4 generations after the end of the Civil War that forced America to reckon with our failure to live up to our founding fathers' standards and our American ideals is truly remarkable. He used only the tools of nonviolence, Christian love and faith, and collective action. This is the most deeply inspiring American history that we have in this country. While Dr. King is beloved and influential, and we have this national holiday on Monday, and hundreds of streets and schools that are named after him all across America and all across California, we know that we have not lived up to his or the founding fathers' ideals. Black Californians continue to fight housing and educational segregation, economic inequality, disparate levels of gun violence, of homelessness, of maternal death rates, among many other injustices. I rise today in recognition of this unacceptable reality and to add my voice to the chorus of voices who finds inspiration in Dr. King, who recognizes the importance of this holiday every year to remind ourselves of where we are and where we need to be, and as someone who remains as committed to our nation's and Dr. King's demands for racial and economic justice for every Californian and every American. Together we can and we must do better. Thank you.
I rise on behalf of the Legislative Women's Caucus in support of SCR 95 and to honor the late Dr. Martin Luther King. As our colleagues have mentioned, today our world struggles with social, political, and economic violence, and there is an urgent necessity to reinvigorate ourselves in the commitment of Dr. King's philosophy and methodology of nonviolence. The numerous acts of nonviolent activism that he led and inspired have transformed our nation and opened the doors to liberty for many for whom it denied. But I always like to remind us on the day that we honor him that his focus expanded as time went on. And at the point of his assassination in Memphis, he was there in Memphis to support the striking garbage workers who not only had been denied any kind of decent working conditions, their wages were beyond poverty, and yet they were doing a job that every city relies on, which is to keep a community clean and pick up garbage. But what he was really focused on was, of course, those workers, but the, in general, economic injustice of low wages and lack of worker protections that Black and other low-wage workers faced and unfortunately continue to face. So I think that we need to remind ourselves that as we continue to face this challenge of economic justice and economic opportunity, that in Dr. King's honor, we should recommit ourselves to those, to righting those wrongs. And I urge your aye vote.
I rise in support of SCR 95 and thank the Black Caucus and my colleague for bringing this forward, and happy birthday. Last year, I had the privilege of introducing Senate Resolution 38, which will encourage each local education agency to include in its curriculum the study of the principles of nonviolence that Dr. Martin Luther King practiced and championed throughout the civil rights movement. This resolution passed the legislature overwhelmingly. Colleagues, we mustn't let these teachings get lost or forgotten. Today's generation is practicing, I'm proud they are practicing the philosophy of nonviolence through strikes at the UC campuses, through organizing at Amazon and in this very Capitol. They are rejecting hate, they are rejecting violence, they are moving forward with peace through justice. By teaching our students about nonviolence principles, we will help future generations move towards racial healing, overcome hate and division, and more importantly, the goal of Dr. King was to build the beloved community. Thank you, and respectfully ask for your aye vote.